so good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, if you're a part of this epic March Mammal Madness audience joining us for the very first time, then we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through over 40 live, free, interactive monthly broadcasts. We bring on the coolest scientists and explorers around the globe, and I want to say a huge thank you to all our teachers this year for joining us for this series today, this epic 7-part festival program, and for our programs year-round. I know it is the strangest time to be a teacher, and so it's so thrilling to get to bring you the coolest in science outreach every single day. Now, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I got introduced to Dr. Katie Hind, and she is the mastermind behind this incredible March Mammal Madness that so many of you know so much about. I've been involved in for 10 years now, and we are thrilled to get the chance to do this epic festival today featuring some of their best and brightest scientists, creators, outreach specialists, all sorts of amazing people to blow your minds all day long. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Dr. Hind to start us off on an epic day. Thank you all so much for being here across Canada, across the US, around the world. We had some Malaysian and Indonesian audiences sign up today, which is pretty freaking exciting. So without further ado, Dr. Hind, thank you so much for joining us. And what is this all about for people that are new to this? What is March Mammal Madness about? And then we'll bring in our special guest for our first program.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, everybody, for coming and seeing us this morning, or whatever time it is where you live. This is the 10th annual March Mammal Madness, and this is a month-long celebration of the tree of life, animal diversity, the natural world, ecosystems, habitats, where we think about the ways in which animals have traits, physical traits like teeth and claws, or strong muscles or strong jaws, and behavioral traits like what's their motivation to interact with other animals and in what ways. And we think about what would happen if an individual from one species encountered an individual from another species. Who would win? Now, they wouldn't necessarily always have a fight, as we see in our tournament, but this is basically a group of scientists and artists and librarians and all sorts of people that just are really into animals and the natural world, talking about what would happen. And people play from home, from their classroom, all over the world, and we use science to talk about what would happen.
It is the coolest program. For those of you who haven't checked it out, I really encourage everyone to go to the LibGuide. So for those who aren't familiar with the LibGuide, it's like the ultimate thing created by scientists and librarians are the coolest people on this planet, and they're the loudest people on this planet. To really stereotype, it went really, really wrong somewhere along the line. So check out that LibGuide. You'll see the bracket, you'll see educator materials, you'll see so much on how to play and get involved in this really, really epic celebration. And Katie.
And one of the things that the librarians have done that is so great with the LibGuide is they've put together a whole bunch of reliable online resources organized by players like grade level, from elementary school to middle school to high school to college to adults. And it's great resources, and it has the .edu URL, so it doesn't get blocked by school computer networks.
Which is the best. We don't want to get blocked by any school computer networks today. Us too, either. This is half the fun of the festival. Now, Katie, we've got some special guests with us today to kick off this fun celebration. So I'm going to bring them in. If you guys all want to introduce yourself, let's get the whole gang here together. I'll pull off that guide for a quick second. Hello, everybody. Welcome in, guys.
Thank you.
Hello. Morning. This is wonderful. So, Marc, you happen to be in our top line with us here. Tell us who you are and what you do and why you have some awesome skulls behind you.
So my name is Marc. I live in North Carolina on the East Coast of the United States. I study sort of how we became human. So I'm interested in how we went from chimpanzee-like things to human-like things and why that happened and what it tells us about what it means to be human. And my friends back here, I have a cast of a human skull and a cast of a chimpanzee skull. And like I said, we're interested in sort of how this process happens. So this is called paleoanthropology. And as I was telling Jesse this morning, the greatest thing about my job is I can walk down my hall and just grab a skull and walk down the hall again and sort of show this really cool stuff. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I've been, I think, part of MMM since 2017, but a fan for a long time. When I was a stay-at-home dad, my daughter took part in it. So I'm just really excited. And I really think MMM is the best part of my year.
It's the best part of my year, and I mean, I know we're just getting started. We're in late February now, but I've got to say there's very little that could probably top this coming up in the months to come. And by the way, a testament for all our YouTube audience today, we've got kids all over the world. Like, if you become a scientist, you get to have a job where you get to be like, oh, I'm going to borrow the skull today, and to be involved in epic things like this, which is a pretty cool gig, I've got to say. So thank you, Marc. Melissa, if you want to unmute your mic, we'd love to hear from you as well. Let's like do the rounds here, people.
Hi. So I am an evolutionary geneticist, and I have been a fan of March Mammal Madness for seems like forever. It's 10 years in a blink of an eye, and 10 years in I guess is a long time. So I'm a research scientist, so I teach and I do research studying sex differences in health and disease, and little critters like this human and this wonderful little Gila monster. So we've been studying sex determination in the Gila monster. This is not a real Gila monster, obviously. I would not hold it like this because it's got this wonderful beaded skin, but also venom. So,
but I mean, the look in the eyes of the kid when you brought the Gila monster into the frame is the essence of what this is all about. I mean, we are all in love with nature here, and this is a beautiful representation of that. So I know we're all nature nerds in this broadcast. I know all our classes are nature nerds in the broadcast. So if we can get everyone to be as absolutely captivated as your child is, that's a good sign. And thank you for bringing the Gila monster. We haven't ever had a program with Gila monsters. We might need to bring you back for a one-on-one in the future. Lara, take us away. Last but not least, I'd love to hear what you get up to.
Absolutely. I'm Lara. I am a primatologist, and I am on the East Coast of the US as well, outside Boston. And I first learned about March Mammal Madness in 2014 when I worked down the hall from Katie, actually. And I started playing it immediately and then became involved as a narrator in 2018. And so I tend to be a little bit primate biased because of my background. I study reproductive hormones and behaviors, and most of my work has been with these guys here, my right-hand friend. This is one of the ones that lives at the Woodland Park Zoo. It used to live at the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. And so I agree, it is absolutely one of my favorite times of year, and I am very excited to be participating again this year.
Well, I must say I'm primate biased as well. Most of my friends are primates. Quite a few dogs as well in there, just to flush out the mix. But guys, this is very exciting. So again, wide range of backgrounds, and all day long we're going to get the chance to hear from geneticists, from artists, from so many specialists in so many fields. Katie, one of the first things I noticed when I was looking at your new bracket, and again, everyone can check that out on our LibGuide, is that not everything in the bracket is a mammal. Now, you've been doing this for 10 years now. There's 64 creatures. Did we just run out of mammals? Like, have we covered every species, or what's the deal? We just wanted to flush it out.
Not hardly. There are thousands of mammals, and we've only featured 548 species in March Mammal Madness through the 10 tournaments that we've held. And one of the things that we decided is that all of nature is amazing, and animals and plants and all sorts of stuff really deserves a chance to get the spotlight with this tournament, because it's not necessarily that we're actually determining the best champion, it's that we're showcasing the tree of life. So ever since the second year, we've always had occasional entrants from outside mammalia. And then systematically, as we've expanded over the years, we've brought in more specialists that know about a wider diversity of life. And we've really gotten some really fun times talking about animals that many people have never heard about, and branches of the tree of life that people don't really realize is just down the road from them. So this is, the joke is like, we now have on our bracket, not all of these combatants are mammals, specifically so that everybody knows that we know that swordfish is not a mammal, right? Obviously not. And so why do we still have the name? Well, the mammals are the mammal, and all the other animals are the madness.
I love it. I noticed that one of my favorite things in your bracket this year, and again, everyone go to that LibGuide, check out that bracket. I was like perusing it this morning. Walrus versus lichen was an unexpected choice. I really enjoyed that very much. I'm picturing him scraping off the lichen off one of the rocks somewhere along the line. I don't know what's going on. Maybe that'll be the battle. So
it's going to be a nail biter.
Yeah.
Riveting science.
So there was I forget where I heard this joke from, but it was that a goldfish can actually kill a gorilla. It just requires a substantial element of surprise, and I'm hoping that we're going to have some of those upsets in the course of this tournament. I'm very excited. So
I would be very interested to read that paper. I'm not familiar with that citation.
I'm going to be like on the computer all March long. Who needs to do anything else? It's a snowy month. In fact, we're in a blizzard here where I am right now, so I'm just ready to get online. Now, for all of you, maybe it's a creature from this tournament. Maybe it's a creature that you've been involved with before. You got to write something really keen about it. But like, what if we have an audience today that's new to this? What should we root for? Like, why is what you guys study cool? Like, convince me. So Marc, kick us off. Like, I mean, you've got some cool stuff going on. You tried hard, but I want to be sold.
Yeah. So I'll say, so I study hominins. Hominins are primates that are closer to us than to any other living primate, but there are none this year, which I'm sort of raw about, but I'll be okay. So I'll say this year, my champion, and I am really bad at picking champions. I never get it right. And I also go for probably the most ridiculous thing, is I'm a huge fan of the leaf slug this year.
Yes.
I mean, it's going up against the swordfish. So like, we can guess, right? I mean, I don't know. I actually do not know the results yet. But I just think it's so ridiculous as a thing, right? Because it's a slug that can essentially photosynthesize. I mean, it doesn't really do that. It sort of eats algae, and from the algae is able to get power from the sun, which is the kind of thing that shouldn't happen, right? And what I love about MMM, as someone who's not an animal behavior expert, is I get to learn so much. And I've told everyone this, that the facts I pick up in MMM, I use as a teacher all the time. And my students are like, how do you know that? So it's really sort of just fun for our jobs as well. But yeah, I think that's my sleeper winner is the leaf slug.
Well, for what it's worth, I've never heard of this personally, but like growing up with Steve Irwin and David Attenborough, I picked up like a lot of these things. I'm very excited to hopefully let me like win the tournament by just virtue of all that knowledge. So there is a slug that I know can like take the ctenophores, like the magic stinging barbs of jellyfish once it eats them, and incorporate them into its flesh, which is just ridiculous. It's like if you ate a chicken and grew wings, or you ate a cow and you could have horns and you ram people. Like that would be the coolest thing. I mean, I don't know if it's the coolest thing ever, but it's certainly pretty freaky. So, okay, team leaf slug for Marc. Melissa, unmute, come back with us. What's your pick? Is it a sleeper, or are you going like full orca this year? Are you going for like, what do we think?
So I don't have a huge preference actually, and that's maybe not a fair thing to say. I like to watch the combatants going through. I like to be surprised with people, and the thing that I like to focus on is making sure that we realize how much we know or how much we still have to learn about these animals. So often we find that we know nothing at all about the genetics of some of these animals. So you mentioned lichen and walrus and orca, and for some of them, you would think that we've done a lot of work, but despite having the human genome in 2001, we still have no DNA analyses for most of these species.
Huh. Well, first of all, I like your complete lack of firm conviction on one of the species. That's a good tack to take. We're going to test people all day long and see what they feel. Now, for me, when my dad used to watch sports, he'd be like, "I just cheer for a good play." Like that's one way to take it, I guess. But then when the Eagles beat the Patriots, you're just so excited because it's the Patriots and no one wants them to win, and so that's the sort of vibe. By the way, oh geez, what was I going to say about this? See, it's too exciting. I'm too tired and excited at the same time early in the morning, so I forget half the things I'm going to go through. But thank you for the take. Oh, muntjac, that's what it is. Talk about species no one knows. Never mind genetics. I mean, I see muntjac on the list, and I should know what that is because I'm a huge nerd, but I don't. And so I'm excited to learn more. And this is what March Mammal Madness is all about. You can find out stats about the species, where they live, what they do, what's going on. You can find out cool names for groups of species, like, is it a wisdom of wombats or something? It's like the greatest name of all time. Yes. So never mind animal group names, parliament of owls, murder of crows, wisdom of wombats is where it's at. And you guys can check out more of those, again, at that magic lib guide. All right. What are we rooting for?
Muntjac deer has amazing sex chromosomes.
I'm excited. All right, beat that with your piece of knowledge.
Go ahead, Katie.
One thing to say, I think, is that because I haven't filled out a bracket in years, because I have a really strong preference. I have the opposite preference probably from Lara, where I'm always rooting for the monkeys and the apes always wipe the floor with them. And so I just would get so heated that I was worried that my own personal biases of the bracket that I had picked would get in the way of my ability to be a good, narrator and kind of think through how the tournament's going to run. So I've stepped back. I don't fill them out anymore. But the thing that we really love about this is that when we look at species out in the world, each one of them is a champion for their niche in their environment, right? They've been favored by selection for, generations, and they're really, really well suited to what they have to do in their day-to-day lives. That doesn't necessarily make them well adapted for a kind of pretend Thunderdome kind of competition. But one of the key things that we talk about in this tournament is that the better seeded team species gets home habitat advantage. And the lower seeded the lower ranked species, they have to be magically transported into a habitat that might not be the one they're adapted for at all. And so one of the things that really comes out here is not that one's better than all of them. It's that some of them are better able and better equipped to take advantage of multiple different habitats, and others are really, really specialized to a very specific niche. And so this is one of the things where we think about the adaptations. They're great for solving that animal's problems in their real lives, doesn't necessarily translate into all these different kinds of environmental settings they might be put in.
So first of all, I would pay good money for a non-pretend Thunderdome in the future when we get like March Mammal Madness 150. Two, so like lion versus polar bear, this could help. This is not an actual bracket thing this year, but if you had a lion versus polar bear and polar bear were higher seeded, the lion would have to go up to the Arctic. That would be a pretty big disadvantage. And so for people filling out the bracket, make sure you're noting those things as the bracket goes along, because that's a pretty huge thing. Now, speaking of niche, before Lara, I'm sorry.
There will never be a real animal Thunderdome with March Mammal Madness, though. That's super unethical to make animals
super unethical. Yes.
So,
Fair enough. Okay, yes.
It's really fun to use the evidence and use the imagination to think about these things. And animals do stuff in nature, and we can sometimes see it with trail cams or other kinds of recordings. But we'd never want to make the animals fight. We want the animals to do what the animals want to do and live in nature and explore their lives using the adaptations that they've inherited.
Duly noted. We have enough conservation things going on where we don't need to create the actual Thunderdome. That's a good point.
No,
now, you mentioned so lichen, I'm gonna, slowly but surely, lichen's gonna win me over by the end of today. If you crack open rocks in the middle of Antarctica, in the dry valleys, there are lichen inside those rocks, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the continent. It's like a great example of epic adaptations that you guys can all look for when you're doing your own brackets. By the way, we have our first person on YouTube that got their own pick. So Bronze Blue Eagle Hellblaze, which is a great YouTube handle, by the way, is voting for Orca first and foremost. If you guys want to let us know in the chat who you're voting for, if you want to let us know where you're from, we'd love to hear from you. But Lara, so we've got this a bunch of different options now. What are you rooting for and why?
So I actually have not filled out a bracket yet either. I am waiting to do it with my 10-year-old daughter. So I stopped doing a personal bracket similar to Katie when I became a narrator. But my daughter really enjoys the tournament now. And so I'm going to sit down and fill one out with her probably this weekend, actually. So I do not have a favorite in the running at the moment. But I did want to say just a good example of the adaptations and kind of problematic situations that animals can find themselves in when they are magically transported from a few years ago is that there was a wolverine in competition, and there were a lot of people really rooting for the wolverine, and the wolverine ended up in a habitat that was not its normal habitat, and much warmer than its normal habitat, and thermoregulation became a problem for the wolverine. So you never know. Katie mentioned before that the animals don't always battle, and so you have to keep in mind what an important factor habitat is in determining the outcome of a battle, because sometimes an animal is just not even well suited to try to engage in a physical contest, depending on that habitat. So I will have a animal that I'm rooting for hopefully by the end of the weekend with my daughter, but as of right now, I am still neutral.
Okay, and I am decidedly not neutral. I am Team Sentient Pinecone. So pangolins win. Literally the greatest creature in the history of mankind. Slowly but surely, they've like gotten public recognition, like they're starting to appear in films and stuff like that. And my biggest aim for civilization over the next 10 years or so is that like everybody knows about pangolins and does everything they can so that there are all the pangolins because they are the best. Seriously, there's nothing. It looks like a little dinosaur. It's got giant claws. It eats all the ants. And like, who wants the ants to take over? So that's what the pangolins are helping us with. They're like bats. They get rid of all the pests. They got scales. They can curl up. They got the cutest faces in the world, which is great. So like, never mind any of these apes and gibbons and all this other, like, no one needs any of those things. Lichens, they're not that cute. Pangolins all the way, all the way. Now, we've talked about habitat being a big factor. So again, you know, lion up in the Arctic, not a good deal for the lion. Is there anything else that helps dictate these battles? Like what in the past has been a big factor and what people can look for in this year's bracket? Katie?
Well, so I think when you sit down and you work on your bracket, understand that you should be imagining within the structure of the division, right? So queens of the science, the sea and sky, those are going to be female combatants. For the collective mammals, those are going to be multiples of that species. But what's really funny about this quirky thing in English where we make collective nouns and have for at least 500 years, right? A pride of lions dates back at least to the 1400s. The Book of St. Albans talks about a pride of lions and a labor of moles and a skulk of foxes. Sometimes these collective nouns are applied to animals that are actually not really social, that live their lives fairly solitary and only come together under certain circumstances. So they might come together during the breeding season. They might come together to raise young. They might come together at like territorial disputes at the boundaries between territories. They might come into aggressive encounters if they fight over a carcass or a kill or something like that. And so it's important to think about what are these animals' abilities to be social. Are they going to cooperate? Do they have any skills for cooperating? Or are they as likely to turn on each other as they are to what they're, you know, supposed to be encountering in March Mammal Madness? So think about those kinds of things. And think that there's going to be at the, you know, we calculate the probabilities of the outcome based on a prime, healthy, adult individual. But when it comes to actually telling the audience about the results, what we do is we actually take the science, we take the facts, and instead of just telling you like a bunch of dry things like lionesses usually hunt in groups of 4 to 6, you know, like what we will do is we will tell a story. We'll put you in the scene. We will explain what is happening as a live play-by-play, and we will use evidence to tell that story. And then we will create story arcs across the tournament as different species advance to the second round, the Sweet 16, the Elite Trait, the Final Roar, and then to the championship. Now, as those stories unfold, what happened in the previous round can play a role in that combatant story. So an injury or a wound or a sickness, or one year we had the dhole, which is a dog relative in Asia. It had eaten a bit, you know, it had won its battle the day before. It had gorged on food, and it takes dogs, you know, more than a day to finish digesting a really big meal. And so when it came to the next night's battles, that canid, that dhole, wasn't interested in any kind of fight or encounter and was like, yeah, I'm just going to sit over here with the meat sweats and digest my food. And so you have these kinds of things that can play out. That is what makes the evidence embedded in a story.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for being the first ever person to use the phrase meat sweats in over 2,000 Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. That was wonderful. We've been talking so much about this bracket. I need to bring it up for everybody so people can see this live on camera for everybody, I think. And so you talk about a species that don't typically gather together. Now, this is going to be a little tinier than I want it to be. I think I'm going to make it full screen here for everybody. Oh, it wants to be big. If you've got good eyes, you can check this out. But one of the things that I noticed is on the mammal collectives on the top left, we've got an embarrassment of pandas, also a delightful name, and a town of prairie dogs. Now, many of you might know prairie dogs gather together all the time. They're in those towns. They sometimes build like whole little cities, like mini Minneapolis, like all the time as prairie dogs. And then pandas, I'm not sure, are gathering together. That's why they're an embarrassment. They don't know how to act around each other. They're like people coming out of a pandemic. They're sort of like, what do I do? How do I do this? They're wearing the mask. I don't know what's going on. So that might be one of our ones where I think there's a little bit of an extra chance for an upset, number 15 beating number 2. Marc, is there anything like in this bracket that we've got up, like that jumps out to you as your, I mean, there's no hominids, and I'm very sorry. Like when they made the bracket, they wanted to leave you out personally. I think it's because your hair's too good already. They didn't want to give you the satisfaction of having some other great thing happen in your life, like winning the bracket. But what jumps out for our folks at home?
I mean, so many things, right? I mean, I will say, again, I always sort of just get excited by the things that seem different or unique or special. In the Queens of the Sea and Sky, the parrot, where like normally the boy parrots are the ones that are the most beautiful, right, in terms of the birds, but here the female is sort of so amazing looking. So I think that's a really cool thing. In terms of if you really want to know, like, again, like everyone else has said, I haven't filled out a bracket in years, but I do help my daughters fill it out. You know, I think bears are pretty damn scary. So
Bears are scary.
yeah, I mean, like, you know, my sort of real thing is I think black bears pretty, you know, intense. But as you know, we always say, don't just root for the number 1 or 2 or 3 seed. You know, you got to pick the one that you like. And you know, like the tagline always is, if you're learning, you're winning, right? It's not about getting the perfect bracket or finding who wins. It's about really celebrating all this amazing diversity and getting a chance to remember that most of us really love learning about this stuff. So you can sort of learn without having to be, you know, thinking about, is it going to be on an exam, then a test the next day? But I'm still for the sea slug. I mean, I don't
amidst all that, sea slugs for the win. All right, I mean, you showed this beautiful picture of an orangutan, which is truly one of the greatest species in the history of man ever. Is there, I mean, you know, one of the things that embodies everyone who's coming in today is this love of nature, this love of wildlife. And so, again, March Mammal Madness is such a great tool for this because you not only get to learn about the animals in a really deep way, like Marc said, you don't have to do it for a test. You're just learning for the sake of learning, and it's such a fun atmosphere of doing that. What sparked your love with wildlife? Like, was it something that you experienced as a kid? Was it a chance to go outdoors? Was it a game or activity like this? Like, I'm just curious for people all day long.
I have always been an animal lover. I've always had dogs. We had hamsters and some birds and fish. We had a lot of animals in my house growing up, and I used to love to go visit the zoo with my parents. And I would say there wasn't any specific event that kind of triggered my love of wildlife or animals in general. It's just been kind of a lifelong passion for understanding the natural world. And I think one of the great things about March Mammal Madness is that it emphasizes, not only do you learn about the individual animals, and I love being a narrator because I know a lot about primates, but unlike Katie, I don't know everything about every animal. And so it's really exciting to me when I sign up for battles and I dig into the scientific literature and I start figuring out the narration for a battle. I sort of temporarily become a very well-read person on these species that I've not previously been particularly knowledgeable about. And so I love that not only do you get a chance to learn specific facts about specific animals, but that within the context of March Mammal Madness, you also have an opportunity to learn about broader ecosystems. And so for me, that's one of the really exciting things because I enjoy understanding not just what's going on with a particular animal, but how does that animal relate to other animals? How does it fit into the larger ecosystem of its natural habitat? So for me, it's a completely natural extension of things that I've been passionate about for my entire life. But I can't say I can point to a particular incident in my childhood or anything that, I was never rescued from the jungle by an orangutan or anything like that. And so I don't have kind of an origin story in that fashion, just an overarching love of diversity and animal science.
I love how birders get a spark bird, right? Like they find that bird that like just gets them in love with birding. It's like, yeah, I don't really have a spark primate.
No. No, I don't. I mean, it would be a great story if I could say, yeah, I got rescued from the Bornean jungle by an orangutan and it became the driving force in my professional trajectory, but no.
I'm so happy this is your go-to hypothetical story because it's so outlandish and it's amazing. So thank you for this in my day. Melissa, Gila monster. I mean, the fact that you had like plastic Gila monster beside you is also amazing. So thank you very much for that. So like, what's the deal? Why? And tell us more about them because they're so cool. It's been so long since I've heard of Gila monsters. Do tell.
So yeah, I want to highlight this incredible artwork that was done actually by one of our March Mammal Madness artists, and I ordered later. I think we haven't actually talked a little bit about how the artwork integrates with everything, and I think it's one of the wonderful aspects that you get ecology and life history and environment and genetics and art and science all together, and it's mashed up and it's wonderful, and we get to focus on this critter. And the Gila monster did have its 5 minutes of fame in the March Mammal Madness, despite not being a mammal, after heckling the mammals in previous years. And I think it got involved, like a lot of people get involved on Twitter by engaging with the battles and with the people making so it being some account got involved. But the Gila monster in general is this wonderful venomous reptile. It has a beaded skin. It's really unique, evolved from an ancestor that lived in a rainforest, but now it lives in the desert. And it can eat up to a third of its body weight in one sitting. They have a very slow metabolism. They're actually not really aggressive at all. So if you get bit by a Gila monster, it's basically your fault. And
sure, blame the victim. Jeez, wow.
Operator error.
You heard it, Melissa. Keep going. Sorry.
But their venom, they're not deadly. So there's no anti-venom for Gila monster. It will feel like flaming lava coursing through your body, and you'll just have to sit and suffer until it goes away several hours later. But also there's a peptide in their venom that's been used, been isolated, and it's used now by pharmaceutical companies to treat type 2 diabetes. So I think the Gila monster is kind of this wonderful example of unique environment, unique adaptations, what's going on with it, and things that you might not think about otherwise. When you're participating in March Mammal Madness, you find out all of these really wonderful, unique, did you know facts about the animals? And I love that. I love the next day being like, did you know that echidnas lay eggs, but they're a mammal? Like, what? That's cool, right? So
that is very cool. And I just want to clarify, your love for them did not stem from a Gila monster saving you in a desert, right? Like that did not happen? This is just
unfortunately, no. And they are protected. Yeah, no, I did not. And they are protected here in the desert.
I like when you have a chewing gallery. By the way, Marc, you are inspiring YouTube. The sea slug that stole our hearts. So very nice. We've got people obsessed with partridges, baboons so far, which is pretty good. Now, Sandy makes a note, and I want to use this to highlight a general thing about the tournament. The #1 seed has won the last several years. Now, in the Lib Guide, you heckle people who just pick all the favorites the whole time. So how are these chosen? Like, Katie, are you just like sitting there being like, this year I really think it's going to be the orca, and then you just make it happen? Or is there some sort of like math to this? Like, what is going on to actually win the bracket that people are doing?
Yes. So what we do is you could, if you wanted, try and develop a database and put information in and create an algorithm that would kick out an answer. But the issue is that we don't have the same information to the same extent about all the animals, so you couldn't fill in all of the information for everyone. And what we do know about them is really tied to their own habitat. And so when we have to think about what happens when all of a sudden they're dropped magically into a new habitat, we have to think about, okay, what does this mean? And so in general, we because it's hard to schedule, we have a subgroup that gets together and we go through all the encounters and we estimate a probability. Now, in general, predators or carnivores are going to have, they end up being kind of punching above their weight because they have a lot of adaptations for taking down prey. And because we have such variation in the natural world, within our division, sometimes there can be, the #1 seed is hundreds of times bigger than the #16 seed. But also keep in mind that in the basketball in the US, the NCAA basketball tournament, in the history of the tournament, a 16 seed has beat a 1 seed only once ever. And we actually did the calculation, and our proportion of upsets is 20%, which is the same that we see in the men's NCAA basketball tournament. So like, while we say, you know, we've had a third seed win the tournament, we've had we've had the 8th seed go all the way to the final roar. There are Cinderella teams, there are surprises, there are upsets. And, you know, sometimes what actually, you know, we use a random number generator. After we've set those probabilities, we then turn to the, you know, our March Mammal Madness Oracle, which is a random number generator. And if it's from this number to this number, it's, you know, species A. If it's from this number to this number, it's species B. And that's different for every single matchup, every round. And then sometimes a random number generator gives you an outcome and you're like, well, that's not very probable. Let's go to the literature. And so what we do is we kind of go and we look for, okay, what's happening in these animals, you know, environments that might be affecting whether or not they're present for the battle or they stay at the battle, or does some other thing come along and change the outcome. So we do have third-party interventions, right? Because in nature, when you're in the middle of a fight is when you're increased risk for being, you know, taken out by another predator, right? We know that empirically. We know that from the research. So we tell the story in a way that is evidence-based, even when it's improbable.
Okay, so this is a very good note for our audience today. And again, we've been getting some comments about this on YouTube, but we should basically assume that the orca's probably gonna just like completely take out the common prawn. I mean, I don't know. We don't know, but like.
Well, you know, so like a few years ago, we had a nimravid versus a dandelion, and like this was in a division where it was called cat egori, and it was all species that had cat in their name but weren't felids, right? So the tiger quoll is you know, this marsupial down in Australia and is not a felid at all, but because it had stripes, it was called a tiger quoll. And the 15th seed in this division was the dandelion, the plant. And like it's really just, you know, partly the humor, but you know, when people put in their bracket predictions, apparently 25% of players thought that the dandelion had the chance against this, you know, this fossil mammal that was saber-toothed. It was kind of like a proto-felid that was like, if you took a cat and a badger and made it an animal, like, and it was like, how is that going to happen? And, you know, I'll be honest, the public generally roots for the underdogs to a greater extent than the scientists calculate the likelihood of that happening.
I had a football pool, well, I didn't have. The teachers in my high school had a football pool, and the teacher who chose all the underdogs all season long won the football pool every single year of his entire tenure at school. So there's just an option for our audience today that you can do that route. It'll see how it goes. For one, I think that the fossil, you know, this like badger cat monstrosity will come back, and the dandelions will just give it allergies, and it'll just collapse into a fit of just snot. And that'll end its tournament. And that's an option that you guys could maybe throw into the works. So we are at our final.
If the random number generator made that outcome, then we could potentially write that battle. And indeed, there is a lot of veterinary science about grass seeds and other things that get stuck up in dog and cats' noses. And they do get infections. And that is something that happened to that nimravid as it advanced. But on its way, it ended up destroying the dandelion. So the seed going along embedded in the nasal passage wasn't enough to count as a win.
Good to know. All right, guys, time flies when you're having fun. We're at our final 6 minutes of the broadcast today. If people do have folks or questions on YouTube, please feel free to share. But I wanted to end with just an inspiration for some of our audience today about the joy of learning, the joy of getting excited about these amazing creatures and plants and all sorts of other cool things, lichens, if that's your thing, sea slugs, if that's Mark's thing. And so for each of you, and we'll start with you, Melissa, like what do you love most about nature? Like for our audience today that might be new to this, they might be finding these species for the first time. Like what inspires you about the natural world that we can sort of inspire our kids with?
Oh, I guess what inspires me is how much we still have to learn. I think what's most interesting is that sometimes it can feel like when you're starting out and you're starting to learn things that everybody knows everything already. And one of the things that becomes really apparent with this competition is that there's a lot we don't know. And so I think as you're putting your brackets together, as you're researching, keep track of those questions about what we don't know, right? Because those are things that might motivate you. You could pursue those in science. You could just check up on them in the next few years. I think that's what motivates me the most. Yeah.
That is a beautiful answer. We in our programs, again, we do about 40 a month, and every single one, kids will ask something that stumps the scientist. And it's so great that we don't know. I think, in the 1900s, they were like, we've solved medicine, and we know everything about physics now. And every 10, 20 years, and I think, honestly, it's like a golden age of science right now. We're exploring so much. We're seeing so much. Today, of course, we're talking about animals and wildlife and all these amazing things, and that's, all of our bread and butter. But if you're interested in the natural world and the cosmos, it's just like the best time to be a curious person. And so thank you for that, Melissa. That was great. Lara, what is your biggest takeaway that we could leave with kids today?
I always like to think about things from an evolutionary perspective. And so one of the things that I really enjoy about the tournament is having an opportunity, again, to focus on a variety of species that I normally don't spend any time thinking about. And in learning about them, understanding how the process of evolution has shaped them so that they are well adapted to their habitat. And so I think it's just a really great illustration of all the different ways in which evolution can produce these different outcomes, not only through something like natural selection, but also through other evolutionary mechanisms and just the long-term trajectory over which we get this amazing diversity of life. And so for me, it's always a really nice reinforcing process to understand not only what the animals are, but sort of how they came to be the way they are.
Yeah. I'm so glad we got an evolution answer. So when I was a kid, I was a super, super nerdy kid. Like my Christmas list were like 26 nature DVDs. I had all the blue planets, everything else, and all the books. For our older audience today, like grade 10 plus, I know we've got quite a few of you guys who are joining on YouTube. The Ancestor's Tale is like my favorite evolution book of all time. It like traces life back from us to like, what's our closest relative? What's our second closest relative? And then back to the point where you're getting to sea slugs and then lichens and all these other things we've been talking about today. So the evolutionary perspective is amazing. It's one of the greatest things we've ever found in science. It's such an elegant idea. And if you get the chance, in like just not too far from London, England, is Charles Darwin's house, and you should totally go visit because it's amazing, and you can walk along his sand path and come up with brilliant ideas yourself if you happen to be in England. It's just not at all that I've done that and like loved every minute of it. Marc, what's your takeaway? Katie, you're last. You get the longest time to think about this, which is good. I'm in Arizona. But Marc,
or everybody takes my answer.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say I did the Darwin sand walk and no inspiration, but I guess I have to go again. Yeah, and both Lara and Melissa kind of took what I would have said, so thank you for that. I will pivot though and say I think that the other thing I think about a lot is that it reminds us that anyone can be a scientist, right? That you can go in the backyard and watch ants or watch dandelions just sit there, I guess. But you can do this stuff, watch birds, watch squirrels, whatever, and you can record this stuff, right? There's like wildlife apps now that let you record everything you see, the birds you see. And, one thing I think about a lot is how over time and, kids love science, love the natural world, love learning about these things. And sadly, we tend to lose that over time. We lose sort of spark of joy. So what I love about wildlife, what I love about MMM is it reminds us how awesome it really is to learn these things and how great it is to just, like Melissa said, learn about these species and also learn what we don't know. Because that's the whole thing about, being a scientist is you learn to something we don't know and then you can go explore that.
That is, again, you guys, this is a bunch of beautiful answers. Katie, they've all been stolen from you. So what? I'll give you an extra second to think with a question from our audience. So Sandy's in North Carolina. She wants to know, what's the troop of monkeys? Is this like a bunch of capuchins? Like, who cares about them? Or is it like a cooler group of monkeys? What do we think?
They are blue monkeys from Equatorial Africa. And if you go to the LibGuide, there is a link to the Latin binomials and the specific common name for all of the species. And you can also find out some additional pro tips that we've put together to get you thinking a little bit more carefully about those species. So go to the LibGuide and you can look up exactly what the species are for each of the collectives.
Fantastic.
And
that is in the YouTube chat for everybody too, so people can all check that. Anyone who's tuning in, the LibGuide's in there. Katie, wrap us up. What's your big takeaway for everybody?
So my big takeaway and what I love about nature and March Mammal Madness is that every single species is a champion for its particular niche, what it's doing in its ecosystem, and that it is the product of natural selection and evolution over generations, and it's evolved in concert with all the other species within its ecosystem. And in this way, all of nature is connected and deserves to be protected.
Guys, you guys have kicked this off so well. You set the bar very high for all our other scientists to come. And in fact, as I said at the beginning of this, we have 7 broadcasts today. We're going to animal behavior, genetics, art and design. We're doing another retrospective to wrap up the day at the end. We've got all the topics today. So thank you all so much for your time. I actually have one more question for all of you before we wrap up. We're going to go a little long because we're rebels and it's our first one and I can do what I want because I have all the power. So, Katie, you say niche. Who says niche? Like, I'm team niche, you're team niche. What about the 3 of you? Like, who's going to win this? Or am I alone?
Brits say niche. So it's either. You can pronounce it either way, niche or niche. I say niche. Other people say niche. You know, tomato, tomato, potato, potato.
I would say either, but I will say that I once said niche in front of a British, very fancy pants anthropologist, and he yelled at me for my pronunciation. So now
now you say niche all the time.
I hold spite a very long time.
Oh, we got a post-it note on the head. Maybe that's the answer. Niche, we don't know. No? Okay, I just wanted to check. And Lara, what do we think? And then we'll wrap up.
I go back and forth, honestly. I'm unpredictable. I could be giving a lecture and you never know what you're going to get. You could get niche, you could get niche. Totally random.
Melissa?
Yeah, I'll just write it and I avoid it at all costs.
This is so, you know what?
N-I-C-H-E.
I'm so disappointed in all of you, and that's fine. That's okay. I'll bring you all back in one quick second. I do want to note for everyone, again, check out the Twitter handle for this. MMM Let's Go. It sort of embodies the excitement of this whole program. Check out that LibGuide. It's in the YouTube chat for everybody, and we'll make sure all our registered classes get it today. There's so much to learn. There's so much to get involved with. You can shirk what this group of people has done today and actually make a bracket. Like, don't get so biased in your specific animal that you don't make brackets. Brackets are fun. That's the point. So please feel free to do that. And if you want to choose the best animal and join us at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, sentient pinecone. Penguins all the way. That's what we're going for. So that's our vote. I think we're trying to inspire you. Never mind the sea slugs. Never mind all these other things they're talking about. Sentient pinecones are the best. At least check out penguins if you haven't seen them before. You four, thank you so much for joining for an epic start to the day. It's so exciting to have so many classes here today. And we'll wrap up the broadcast there. Have a wonderful time, everyone. See you guys on YouTube in like 10 more minutes. And